It doesn't say.
There it goes. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to our interfaith space. I would call it our sacred space, our eighth session, our eighth class in the spring session of interfaith explorations. And this specific session of interfaith explorations is focused on spiritual literacy, in which we're learning about specific spiritual practices or activities that we do to deepen our relationship with the sacred and the world around us. The practices that help us connect to God, or what word you all use for something more than ourselves or something beyond ourselves. Practices that enable us to connect us with our own true self, the depth of our being, and the world around us. My name is Sophia Said. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm also the executive director of the Interfaith Center, which is a nonprofit committed to reducing the fear and prejudice among the world religions. And we do that through providing education, dialogue, and relationship building opportunities. Our sessions are co sponsored by Cobb Institute, which is named in the honor of their founder, John Cobb, and inspired by the knowledge that all life is interconnected and in process of becoming. Our classes are also co-sponsored by Process and Faith, which is a collaborative project of Center for Process Studies and Cobb Institute, of workshops and learning circles featuring faith leaders from different traditions who share insights concerning what it means to be a whole person, a whole community, and how we might work together to help protect and nurture our planet. And as always, I'll remind you about our wonderful resource that I absolutely love, Spirituality and Practice website, where we go to learn more about the spiritual alphabet. And last but not the least, along with me is our friend, our teacher, our moderator, our facilitator, Dr. J. McDaniels, who is helping us navigate, helping us think and navigate spirituality and shape our own spiritual and religious point of views. Today we are discussing S for shadow, which I'm really looking forward to, Jay, and W for wonder. I'm hoping that we start with S for shadow, which is the spiritual practice that encourages us to make peace with those parts of ourselves that we don't find very beautiful, those aspects of our personality that we might find despicable or unworthy or embarrassing, like anger, resentment, shame, violence. So, how do we make peace with them? That's the practice of S for shadow, and I hope that we will end with W for wonder. So, is that right, Jay? Is that how we're going to start today?
That's right.
Okay, so let's do it.
All right. Well, Sophia stole my thunder just a little bit, because I think I was going to read from Spirituality and Practice, which said something of the same. So let me see if I can get that up.
I think I got you started on that.
Yeah, here we go.
Definition of shadow, actually.
So let's read it together, and you be thinking about what leaps out for you, and I'll raise some thoughts and some questions, and then we can just talk. So on the left, this is from Spirituality and Practice. The spiritual practice of shadow encourages us to make peace with those parts of ourselves that we find to be despicable, unworthy, and embarrassing: our anger, jealousy, pride, selfishness, violence, and other evil deeds. In Christianity, shadow aspects show up as the 7 deadly sins. Muslims talk about nafs as our lower selves, and Buddhists refer to negative emanations of mind. Societies and cultures also have dark sides. Shadow is a corrective to any tendency to make spirituality into simplistic feelings of sweetness and light. It balances Pollyanna thinking. People do terrible things to each other, sometimes because of their beliefs and in the name of their religion. Individuals, even those who are deeply spiritual, go through dark nights of the soul when depression and not knowing take on terrifying dimensions. Nature, the source of so much inspiration, also has its shadowy elements: hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, floods. By honestly acknowledging these aspects of life, we move toward a rounded view of reality and build a foundation for personal wholeness. The spiritual practice of shadow is also called for when we discover we are projecting aspects of ourselves onto others, both our negative qualities and our untapped talents and powers. The latter are golden shadows, our nobler aspects that we tend to attribute to teachers, celebrities, sports superstars, and national heroes we admire. Practicing shadow means you reclaim all your flaws and gifts, accepting yourself and your complexity. So I'll get us started, but then I'll get us off gallery view and we can just talk. Shadow, it's really more complex, or involves more things than you might think, or I might think at first. So first, just an observation. This is on the right there. I think some of us are much better at acknowledging our individual sins than our collective sins. And if what we mean by sin is a kind of shadow, it's interesting to me that I can acknowledge the way I fall short in a whole lot of ways. But sometimes I will say, point to a larger group, say the teachings of my religion or something. They're perfect. It's I that fall short. And so I hope we can spend some time talking about collective shadows, the shadow side of religion and the shadow side of nationalism. And we don't just spend all of our time talking about the personal side. But then going on to the personal side, the individual shadows, I used to teach the Enneagram, and maybe some of you are familiar with the Enneagram as a psychological typology that helps people understand their personality traits. And I remember saying, as I was teaching the different personality types, our gifts are our sins. And so, for example, if you have a gift for motivating people, that's your gift. You have that capacity. That can also be your sin. You find yourself seeking applause, wanting to be affirmed by others. Your gift becomes your sin. If you have a gift for to help people, that of course that's a wonderful thing. But your gift can become your sin if you can't leave other people alone. And if you can't recognize that sometimes they don't need your help. So if sometimes our gifts are our sins, some questions emerge for me that we might want to talk about. When is it best to battle our sins, to struggle against them? And when is it best to embrace them? Islam has the idea of jihad. And jihad literally means struggle. And sometimes it seems to me we have things inside ourselves that we know they're there, but we really have to struggle. And that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. But in other contexts, we need to embrace the darker sides of ourselves and transmute their energies in some way. So what's the difference between struggling and embracing? And how do we know the difference? Those are just my thoughts. To get us started, let's talk just for a moment about that first observation. Is it anybody else's impression that sometimes we're a little better at acknowledging our individual sins than our collective sins? Sometimes. I see two head nods and a lot of still faces. So just something to think about. Just something to think about. Just something to think about. Let's go on to the collective, and then we'll go to the individual. Do you think that sometimes religion, including your own, whatever it is, can be a source of sin? And by sin here, I mean violence, greed, hatred, that kind of thing. And there's a way to opt out of that, and it goes like this. My religion is perfect. It has an essence that's pure and clean and good and wonderful. And it's just that we, the followers, fall short of it. It has a pure essence, but we fall short. And that way of thinking is called essentialism. Mm. It takes the religion and says, my religion has an essence which is fixed and good. The problem is how people fall short of it in trying to appropriate it. Do y'all understand that way of thinking? Please nod your head. Okay. And I want to take you to a critique of that. And this critique has emerged, especially in Judaism, in Jewish thinking, but also in some circles of Christianity. I'm less sure about Islam here. And it's to say that, truth be told, our religions are historical. They don't live in the sky as fixed essences. They are traditions from the get-go. Mm-hmm. And they change and they evolve. They are what their people think in the time at issue. And there's nothing that stands above them as a fixed essence. Our religions are our historical traditions. And they're all usually pluralistic. Some people say you shouldn't say Christianity, you should say Christianities. You shouldn't say Islam, you should say Islams. Shouldn't say Judaism, you should say Judaisms. Shouldn't say Buddhism, you should say Buddhisms. Because it's the people and their ideas that form the religion. And then you can hear some people saying, I think from the get-go, there have been problems in my tradition. Ideas that have led sometimes to violence or to arrogance, to patriarchy, to we-they dichotomies. We're pure, they're impure. And that's our problem. That's a problem in our religion. It may not be my problem, but it's our problem. Okay, do you understand that idea? Religions as historical versus religions as having fixed essences. What do you think? Any thoughts? Eileen.
So I want to go back to what you said, because I've been struggling with this week, because we went to the Greenwood Tulsa Museum, Race Riot Museum this week, and then we went to the Great American First Americans Museum in Oklahoma City. Both of those were in Oklahoma, and I am just amazed at what we do to each other. And if people own whatever, own is the wrong word, but are in a space, and then all of a sudden others of us come in and want that space, then we do whatever we want to take it away. So I don't know how, I just want to get that out there because I need to hear from people about it. I didn't come feeling very good about myself.
That's fine. Sometimes that's called imperialism.
Yeah.
and religions have carried within them the impulse to imperialize, to take over.
Well, there's imperialize, and then there's just downright murder, just killing people and then blaming them. I don't know. Yes.
Well, okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
All right. No, Dan.
My father studied to be a minister in the Church of Christ before he found the Baha'i faith. And I learned many lessons from him. One of the things he was fond of saying, and I'm trying to address the dichotomy you set up of essentialism versus, what was the alternative?
Well, you can call it historicism if you want.
Historicism, okay. And he had a framework that's kind of in between the two. His comment was, there's a difference between Christianity and churchianity. And for him, Christianity was the pure teachings of Christ. You might say the red letter Bible. And it was pure and essential. There's a difference between what the teacher taught and the believers believe. And all kinds of adaptations have been created to each of the religions historically, and many of which have resulted in the kinds of challenges that you're talking about. And I was reflecting on that in terms of Baha'i history and trying to see where that might apply here. And I'm reminded of a story of some of the followers of Baha'u'llah who were so angered by the treatment he received at the hands of the authorities that they enacted violence against others. And Baha'u'llah's reaction was, the behavior of my believers harms me more than the actions of those who oppress me. And so I guess that's the way I could identify with collective shadows. I love the concept because when I lived in Africa, one of the things I was told is that in many African languages, there's no word for evil. The equivalent is roughly translated as not good. And it relates to the concept of shadow because goodness is like light, and anything other than goodness is just the absence of goodness. And you might think of the shadow as the absence of light. I'd love to say more, but I'll stop there.
Okay, all right. Alan.
I got my PhD at Oklahoma State and spent time at OSU Tulsa teaching, which is near the Greenwood district. It's a fascinating place, and it's incredible achievements there. At one point it was the second best African American school in the nation for their kids, and a lot of things. And the government has actually tried to take Greenwood away from the people there and make it its own museum, etc. The state of Oklahoma about 20 times over the past so many years. And so also recently there was a Black Lives Matter protest, and they followed the same path of the mob that attacked Greenwood, and a Choctaw man got run over, and there were no charges for that man who got run over. I mean, the guy who assaulted the guy. So it's a shame that we still see elements of that now so long after the actual race riot.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So anybody else want to speak to this general question of the collective sins of religion? Anybody else want to speak to that? Nita?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how many times throughout Christian history, the Crusades, other times when lots of horrible things have been done in the name of God. And I think collectively, there's this urge to justify our actions, to cloak it in. I mean, in the Civil War, both sides thought that God was on their side. And so I think there is, in collectivism, I think there is this need to justify.
Mhm.
And yet it translates down into individual responsibility as well. And I think a lot about Desmond Tutu and his work in South Africa with Truth and Reconciliation. There was a need to do collective responsibility. But at the end of the day, one by one, there had to be truth telling and forgiveness. And so I think I'm not sure we can separate it, I guess is my thought.
Mhm. With regard to religion, and I think we'll leave this, I just kind of want you to know and want us to know that there are Christian thinkers and Jewish thinkers and maybe Muslim thinkers, I'm not sure actually, who say that the problems go all the way through Jesus, the Christians would say. You can't segment out Jesus and say that was pure and everything else fell short of that. You have to recognize the ambiguity even there. And I think in a Muslim context, the way that would sound is the problems go back all the way into the Quran. You have to recognize the problem, the ambiguities in the Quran itself. You can't segment it out and say it's pure, but everything falls short of it. In Judaism, it's a little different because I don't think they've ever had a something, a person or a book that they've claimed was absolutely perfect. Jews have been more historical in their way of thinking from the get-go. And so I don't know if there's an impulse in Judaism to say, but, the Torah is perfect. Maybe there is among the Orthodox, I don't know. Ellen, you can answer that. But I just want for us to be clear how deep the critique goes. It doesn't say there's something pure and the rest is divergence from it. It says there's ambiguity all the way through. Ellen, do you have a thought on that?
Well, the closest thing we have to what you talked about as being perfection would be the way the Torah is considered by the I would say the ultra-Orthodox and Orthodox, which is that it's the word of God. And because it's the word of God, each word was chosen, selected by God. And even though Moses wrote it, he was told exactly what to write. So there are troubling things in the Torah, which in terms of battles and those kinds of things, and who wins the battles and who doesn't win the battles and what happens to them and what we're supposed to do with that. So Amalek, who was in the Torah and is known for coming to as the Israelites were wandering through the desert, Amalek came from the rear where the elderly, where the children were, and attacked from the rear. So it's the kind of thing where every year we're supposed to remember, not forget, stamp out, but not forget, that kind of behavior. So there's, I don't know why I got on that track. That's actually not what I had intended to say. But there are things in there that are troubling, and that people who believe that the Torah is written maybe as an interpretation, or by people who are divinely inspired, but not necessarily the hand of God, the finger of God, are able to struggle with that more than those who believe that everything in there is, no matter how positive or negative viewed, is the word of God. I guess that was the point that I wanted to make. But there is no person. There is no, I mean, we know that Moses was flawed. We know that Abraham was flawed, and we learn from their flaws. We try not to replicate their flaws, but we consider that they were flawed. Even ultra-Orthodox people consider that they were flawed.
No person, at least.
No. But, you know, what I was going to say with regard to Judaism is that we have streams of Judaism, right? So there's Orthodox, there's modern Orthodox, there's ultra-Orthodox, there's conservative, there are more conservative conservatives, there's more liberal conservatives, there are Reform Jews, there are more conservative Reform Jews. We've got all these streams of, you know, everyone and his brother has his own interpretation of how Judaism should be practiced and all that. So what disturbs me all the time is when I see about the infighting. So, you know, you read about what goes on in Jerusalem at the Kotel, at the Western Wall, where women are given a part and they want to participate, and men who don't believe that women should participate in that way are actively trying to physically move them from that spot. That is very distressing to me, that this continues to go on in that way, so much infighting.
Well, maybe that should complete our discussion of collective shadow vis-a-vis religion. And let us just take note that nationalism and patriotism also can be vessels for that. Sophia, do you want to say, you're leaning forward, do you want to say something here before we move on?
Yeah, I will in the end, but Steve had a question. I was leaning forward to see there was a hands up.
Okay.
Steve had a question or a comment, and I thought we missed him.
Go ahead, Steve. Yeah.
Steve, you're on mute.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I felt like all of what Ellen shared was pertinent and exactly where we are. And you know, that ambiguity, I'm having a hard time speaking today. Ambiguity. I see it so much in Christianity. And like you said, from the very beginning, it's always been a part. And I was taught most of my life that God was unchangeable, that God was really static, never moved, was always. And really what I'm seeing now is, no, God is alive. God is moving. He's always moving and inviting us to move with him. But most of the time where I get hung up, I want to hold on to the way it used to be. And the words that keep coming to me are, we are perfectly imperfect. All of us. And a lot of our teachers and, you know, people from throughout history have all been perfectly imperfect. Was there an essence there? Absolutely. But every word they spoke was not perfect. And so that's really all I wanted to share.
Let's move to the individual level. And this is really just a question I would love to hear thoughts on from you. When you read literature of shadow, a lot of times it says, embrace the shadow. There's an angel in your devil or whatever, you know, there's something good to be squeezed out of it. But first you have to be honest about it and embrace it. And I know that that's true in many circumstances. I also wonder about the role of struggle. and where you actually have to battle demons inside yourself to move forward in life. Does anybody have any thoughts on embrace or struggle or battle or both or neither? Yeah, Kim.
I was just thinking about that. I'm doing the Sunday school lesson for my group this Sunday, and we have a book that I don't know who chose it, but it has a lot of really traditional Christian ideas in it, and particularly just atonement theory is really big part of what I'm having to read this week, and the resurrection is atonement for our sin. And so I am struggling so hard with this lesson, and someone warned us about the misogyny they saw in the, and so I'm going through this chapter and with a whole different perspective than I would have maybe even a few years ago. And by just stripping out, I'm stripping out all the sin from the chapter. I'm stripping out all the kingdom talk from the chapter, but yet it is helping me to get to an essence of something that is more along a line of a shift in thinking and of Christianity. And so, yeah, we're struggling with it, but it helps to, sharpen our beliefs and to explore other ways of looking at things, other perspectives.
Thank you. Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer. Go ahead. Unmute.
I can only speak from my perspective, but my understanding and my heart is that we were all born perfect, but that we need education. And so if we are not properly trained, we tend to make mistakes and choose self. And that the true sin or the true evil is to have an insistent self that wants its own way. And when you look at that, in my perspective, struggling against that insistent self is the beauty. That's where we reach acceptance in God's eyes, perhaps. Because the struggle is where we're striving to be better than what we have been, whatever that is or wherever that is. And so for me, it's a personal thing, but I also believe that if each one of us was in that struggle and outward about it, not just making it private, but making it clear, that collectively society would be affected and we would have improvement in our communities that it has not been shown across history, because prejudice is just a ridiculous, rampant cause of war, and it's also somebody's selfish ego that's wanting to be in and getting everything for themselves. So that's my personal perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're going to move to wonder, but I'm wondering if Sophia, would you like to say anything about the internal jihad?
Let me unmute myself. Thank you for bringing it out. It's such an enriching and interesting discussion. It's I've been really thinking, as you said, is it embracing or is it struggling? And since jihad is such an important concept in Islam, and there are different forms of jihad, and the highest form of jihad or the most important form of jihad is struggling with your own nafs, which is kind of a less, I don't know how to translate nafs, yourself, your ego. And I don't know if we can do that without embracing it first. So as I was thinking about your questions, I was thinking, how can because I live with that struggle. We all do, and that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to struggle with ourselves. But I can't do that without first getting to know myself and my deep, dark side and the things that are shadow for me or the darkness in me. If I continue to try to avoid them and close my eyes to them or flee from them, then I actually cannot do the struggle. I cannot uh, get to the place where I can struggle, that real growth can come from them. So I think for me personally, as I work on this spiritual practice of jihad, embracing is the first step. Actually, getting to know myself is the first step. And then embracing my shadow side or the darkness or dark consciousness in me is the second step. And then struggling, because that's where the real growth comes from. Anyway, so I don't know if I can separate these two things that you mentioned.
Yeah.
I think they go together.
Thank you. I see a lot of head nods to that, Sophia. Let's turn to wonder. And I'll share the screen just to hear what the Brussets say, and then we'll talk. Here's what they say. Wonder begins in the senses, comes alive in the imagination, and flourishes in adoration of the divine. It arises from our natural curiosity about the grand adventure of life. It increases our capacity to be a bold inner space tripper and an avid explorer of the physical world. There is no end to the things that can awaken our wonder, from the majesty of the night sky to the smell of lilacs in the spring, to the turning of the leaves in the fall. And it's all right here, a feast of epiphanies and astonishments in the daily round of our spiritual lives. So I thought we might talk. Here's some things we can think about. One is the process of re-wondering, when we take things for granted and we forget how amazing they are, how to learn to re-wonder. And one is a constructive role for bewilderment, from being confused, for being able to say, I don't know. One is the place of wonder in education. And some people think it really is full in kindergarten and elementary school, and then you lose it after that. One is the idea of spiritual curiosity is a spiritual virtue itself. And one is the idea of God and wonder, and it's the idea that some people say God is not a being, but the feeling of wonder itself. That's God. So those are things that we can talk about ourselves. Let's start with re-wondering. Do you know what I mean? You know, you can kind of take things for granted. It's the everyday world. You know, there's this, that, and the other. And to all of a sudden look at something that's actually very familiar to you, and all of a sudden it becomes, oh, I'd forgotten. That's really beautiful. That's really amazing. So that's re-wondering. Anybody ever had an experience of re-wondering they would like to share? Or a context for re-wondering. It can be your backyard. It can be a cup of tea. It can be a friendship. It can be your mother. It can be anything. Bill.
Yeah, I think these last, oh my goodness, it's probably been 20 years when I've been re-wondering so many things. You know, I mean, it's just trees and flowers and birds and just nature as a whole has just been opening up to me, completely re-wondering. And also spiritually, as I've gone into actually rethinking my faith, or deconstruction and then reconstruction of my faith, my wonderment has increased just in terms of my view of God and my love for God. It's been a really opening experience for me these last, I guess, 20 years or so. You know, it's been a long time, but just in these last 5 years, it's gotten much more, you know, because I've been working harder at it, doing more reading and study. I'm just flabbergasted at my re-enchantment. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. The spirituality of flabbergast. Anita.
I've most of my career has been working with children in education or in ministry or both. And I've always said I would keep children in my life because they are not cynical. They keep us focused on wonder. If you look at a baby, the discovery of moving their fingers for the first time, children just keep us in wonder. And so I always want to keep children available in my life because they teach me about wonder. But also, after 25 years in ministry and education, we moved out to a ranch west of Fort Worth, Texas. And there is where I really understood St. Francis for the first time, completely. I'd been to SCC, all that. But there we were more isolated and totally enmeshed in nature. And as St. Francis said, nature is the first Bible. And I really resonate with what Bill said. It's just so much to discover. But at the other end of the spectrum, I do a tremendous amount of grief ministry. And it's this juxtaposition of the wonder of children and the wonder of death and suffering. Because people who have either touched death or near death or have suffered through, they understand about each moment counting and each wonder is a miracle in itself. And so it's a strange combination, this passion for children and this passion for dying, and meeting both. It's coming full circle.
Thank you, Nita. Lynn.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you just said, Nita. And that's my experience has been very much awakening in nature. I mean, I grew up a traditional Episcopalian and somewhat Methodist. But when I had cancer as a kid and got through the chemo, radiation and all, and was able to kind of open up again to wonder in just my backyard with a lot of trees and birds and animals. It was a reawakening, a kind of wonder and really a full senses experience of gratitude. And I think that when we use the word wonder, part of what I think this kind of like second naivete of, oh, for all fresh, I think that there's, for me, kind of a personal relationship with it. It's dynamic. So it's not just the word wonder, but there really is this mysterious relationship. And just real quickly, I mentioned before the owls, and I think, Kim, are you the one also? I don't need to ask you. We'll catch up. But the last 3 nights, I've been calling at sunset, and one of the owls has started swooping within 3 to 5 feet of me several times. And last night I was bowing to them. They had not done it. It's usually I think it's the male that's doing it. It is a couple though. But it's just amazing that there's this mysterious relationship going on. And first time it came really close, I thought, well, I better be careful if it's going after its talons and wants to guard the territory. I may lose something here. But it really does seem curiosity on the owl's part, and certainly on mine.
Yeah.
And it fills me with wonder. And that happens definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. The relationship between curiosity and wonder, that I love it, Lynn, that you say that it was the owl's curiosity. That's so nice. Let's talk just for a second, if we want to, about bewilderment. And let me tell you exactly where I get that word. I get it from Islam, and more specifically from the Sufi tradition. And there's a tradition in Sufism, as I understand it, that says the state of being bewildered is not always bad. It can be very good. And it's the state of not knowing what God is, not knowing what the universe is, not knowing even what you are. And it opens a space. Bewilderment opens a space for wonder and for lots of other things too. A kind of wisdom that can't be put into words, a kind of intuitive wisdom. But in the beginning, there needs to be bewilderment. And I'm reminded of that Walt Whitman poem where it goes something like this. A child walks up to me and holds up a blade of grass and says, "What is this?" And Whitman says, "How could I answer? I don't know what it is either." And the point was, he was in a state of wonder. How could I answer? I don't know what it is either. So, anybody want to speak to wonder and bewilderment? Have you ever been bewildered in a way that opened you into wonder? Bill?
Yeah, it strikes me, the term bewilderment is really strikes me because I've been thinking a lot about chaos, the chaos that exists in our sometimes in our past, in our and wanting God to help us with our chaos. But in reality, it's actually, we're bewildered about our disorganized lives and the way things have proceeded. But yet, as we can actually grow to appreciate that, as God works with us, this chaos that we're bewildered over, that we're concerned about, we can actually begin to realize that God can work with our chaos, and it's truly can be there can be discoveries in it. Like, I guess it could be made even in the shadow self, where discoveries can be made that are actually take your breath away from our past. So I like the term bewilderment.
Bill, may there be more chaos in your life.
Yeah, well, yeah, well, yeah.
Was that going too far? Maybe, I don't know.
No,
Okay,
that's fine. No.
Steve. Steve?
I feel, bewilderment, and I'm going to try to make this as quickly as possible, but my grown son had to move back in with us 11 years ago because of a terminal disease. And he didn't actually die until this past June. But there was so much bewilderment, so much grief, so much pain. But all throughout the 11 years, there was such a renewed wonder. There was things that were so, because honestly, he became more and more childlike. And so he was leading me, he was teaching me without knowing it at all. And I experienced more wonder in the last 11 years than I think I've experienced in my whole life. But it was absolutely intertwined and connected with that bewilderment. And just a couple of weeks ago, when I wasn't on, I went to visit my dad in Arizona, and I bought a book on Amazon just before I went, Bearing the Unbearable. And as I was reading that book, it was just touching me. And come to find out, she has a care farm with rescued animals and grief therapy, and she does all of this stuff. And I didn't know it, but as I read the book, I looked it up online, and it was just 2 hours from where my dad lives. So I scheduled the time to go by and get to meet with her. And there was so much creative arts and nature type stuff. And she has rescue animals, horses, cows, alpaca, dogs, pot-bellied pigs, sheep, goats. I mean, everything you can imagine. And I was actually in wonder just out there, because somehow these animals recognize grief. And they literally would come over and just put their heads against my body. And I mean, you know, the goats are lower down and just lay the head against my leg. And it was, once again, I was there because of grief, but what I came away with was so much wonder.
That's amazing.
Wonder. And I would recommend Joanne Cacciatore's book, Bearing the Unbearable. It is an amazing book for anyone that is grieving, especially loss of children. And she quotes so many different religions in that book. I mean, it's amazing. And I know she has ties to Christianity, but she is a Zen priest also. So it was just an amazing, and I was just looking it up. Sela Care Farm, a compassionate community where grief and love, pain and beauty intersect.
Yeah, those are
where they all intersect and come together. So that's what I wanted to share.
What wonderful combination, Steve. Grief and love and pain and beauty.
Yeah.
Woven together. That's really, really helpful for us all, I'm sure. Dan.
Well, Steve's story was so touching, I almost forgot what I wanted to say. Thank you, Steve. Wonder is a key concept in the Baha'i teachings. In fact, Baha'u'llah, in response to questions from a Sufi mystic, wrote a book called The Seven Valleys and the Four Valleys that describes the stages of a soul's journey with the union with its creator. And these, just quickly, these seven valleys are the valleys of search, of love, of knowledge, of unity, of contentment, of wonderment.
Yeah.
And finally, true poverty and absolute nothingness.
Mm-hmm.
And wonderment is really described as being struck dumb by the beauty of God. The seeker becomes conscious of the vastness, the glory of creation, and discovers the inner mysteries of God's revelation. I just wanted to share that. Thanks.
With such wonderful coalescences of wonder and grief, wonder and love, wonder and gratitude. Bill or Mary Beth, do you have something you want to say? Please. Unmute.
3 years ago, I had triple bypass surgery right when COVID was hitting. And there was the combination of the whole thing. Plus I had that after effect of anesthesia where you have brain fog for months usually. And there was definitely grieving and bewilderment in that. But it makes me think of what you were talking about with the shadow, and a shadow in an institution, is that if a person or institution doesn't slow down, it's hard for them to turn a corner, just like with a car, if you're going to go around the corner and have any meaningful change, it seems like slowing down can be important to go that adjusted route. And so I connected the bewilderment with the need for change, really, in all of us and in an institution. And I had, with the help of a spiritual director, I had a tremendous breakthrough beyond my wildest dreams, but it was after the really dark time, so that's all I had to say.
Thank you.
Mhm.
My older sister, has Alzheimer's, and I go see her. She's in Austin, Texas now, but I see her periodically, and I love to see her. And she, in her earlier period, during the onset, she suffered a lot from anger and anxiety and all kinds of things. But at this particular phase in her journey, she's become sweeter and can laugh in ways that she could never laugh before. And I think she can experience wonder. I think she can experience delight. And so I tell you that to say that these categories, wonder and gratitude, people can grow in them, even as they might decline in other ways. And that's to be honored. That's to be honored. Young children, really old people, people that are ill. I think I've learned that from our discussion today. And it's time for us to close. Thanks for such a rich, wise conversation, Sophia.
Yes, absolutely. Let's close. We're almost at time. Jay already touched a little bit on the Sufi practice, and actually Dan also gave you the 7 stages of our search of the soul. So I don't want to talk about wonder, except I want to say that for me personally, as a Sufi, wonder is very much related to living in a field of unknowing and understanding and having knowledge of the fact that we don't know it all, and having respect for the great mysteries of life. And if any one of you want to have a simple practice to enhance your spiritual practice of wonder, I would strongly encourage something that works for me, which is watch National Geographic movies about oceans or the seas or dolphins or whales of Nordic North. I mean, they are just so beautiful and full of those amazing mysteries of life which we cannot understand. And I do that regularly, and they definitely, in my opinion, enhance our own sense of wonder in the unknown. I want to tell you that next week we are doing X for mystery, which is very directly related for wonder. For me, mystery and wonder are pretty much synonymous, because for me, wonder lives in the concept of mystery or not knowing. And we'll also do Z for zeal. I hope to see you all next week. I want to close today with a very sweet and simple poem by Jet Widdick about wonder. So let's listen to that as a closing prayer. So Jet Widdick goes, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, oh brand new day. Thanks for showing up in that special way. Nice to meet you, oh brand new day. Thanks for showing up in that special way. Being by my side and never sway. The sunny glow and the godly rays, morning dews and evening hoos, with me they all pray. For the wonders that I see, too many things to list, and endless treasures that exist. They line my heart till they cannot fit. Love's fortunes and life's gifts. I told you some, but there are many that I missed. Inside my soul, they all live. Peace, salam, and shalom to you all.